Well, as you may know if you've watched my video about the Carlton Barracks in Glasgow, I like a good wall. And this is some wall. I mean, walls generally enclosed areas of land, somebody's property or somebody's house. But this is not really the sort of wall you would find at the bottom of your garden. This is a wall and a half. It's hard to know if it's a wall enclosing an important bit of land that you maybe weren't meant to go into, or whether it's simply a retaining wall that stops the sloping bit of ground up there from landing on my head. But there's no getting away from the fact that this is some wall, and all my instincts are telling me that it's a defensive wall. Edinburgh's had a number of walls over the years, all built at different times to serve a particular need. In addition to performing a defensive role, they also allowed for the control of goods in and out of the city. It prevented smuggling and allowed for the taxation of certain goods. And Edinburgh's had many walls over the centuries. I think the earlier ones are probably just a sturdier upgrade of a defensive wooden fence or palisade.
There were probably just 4 main walls or town walls in Edinburgh's past. The Wall of Ward dating to the 14th century, the King's Wall or Murus Regius dating to the 15th century and something of an extension to the Wall of Ward, the 16th century Flodden Wall, and the 17th century Telfer Wall. The Wall of Ward was more of an additional castle defence than a town wall. It enclosed a small area mostly around the east of the castle, protecting the castle's more vulnerable sides that weren't so steep and rocky. Those stairs leading from Johnson Terrace to the Grassmarket mark part of the course of both the Wall of Ward and the Flodden Wall. The Flodden Wall was built in the 16th century following the defeat of the Scots at the Battle of Flodden, when it was felt the city might come under attack from an English army. And at this location it would have made good use of or incorporated bits of the existing Wall of Ward. The wall at the side of those steps is probably part of the original wall. It's often hard to be certain what walls were what, whether just big walls or part of one of the major defensive structures. And often buildings were added to the walls, and you're never sure if that wall is part of the later building or part of the earlier wall. You would never want to waste or demolish a big sturdy wall, and it always made sense to incorporate it into any later construction. It is thought that this side of this building at 17 Victoria Terrace may actually be part of the original King's Wall, which enclosed a larger area than the castle's Wall of Ward, but a smaller area than the later Flodden Wall. On a map dating to 1582, we can get a good overall picture of the extent of Edinburgh's wall, in this case the Flodden Wall. You can clearly see the wall itself as it heads down from the castle towards the Grassmarket and then encompasses most of the town or city. Along its length are various gates or ports, along with small towers or bastions put in place to bolster the wall's defensive capability. The only part of the city without a wall is on the north, where the Nor Loch or North Loch sits, now the site of Princes Street Gardens, and which provided natural defence on that side. There's the West Port, an entrance into the city from the west, and here's a different angle on it in this later map of 1765, where we get a good look at just how enclosed the Grassmarket was within the city wall. And here's that area today, with locals and visitors now allowed to move freely to and fro.
Well, I've just come up the grass market into a narrow lane called the Vennel, appropriately enough. And it's here that we can see some of the best preserved sections of the Flodden Wall, which actually stops more or less here. Well, stops isn't the right word. It stops in this lane because here the Flodden Wall carries off that way. And we get, again, a really good glimpse of another of Edinburgh's old walls, the Telfer Wall. A really nice bit of carved wording just behind me. I'll read it. This window was made in the old city wall with the sanction of the town council 1876. I'm getting a round of applause here for some reason. I'm not sure what's going on. If it's not the noise of vehicles reversing, it's applause. I don't know what's happening. But you know, I think it's just a nice little thing there. It's perhaps an indication that as the wall went out of use and we no longer needed to defend ourselves from the likes of England, bits of the wall were incorporated into buildings, windows and doorways were put into it, and gradually it just fell out of use.
Here we see where two walls meet, the Flodden Wall and Telfer's Wall, the latter merely a later extension of the Flodden Wall, built in the 17th century to enclose an area of land acquired by the town council. We can't follow the Flodden Wall at this point, so we'll continue up by the Telfer's Wall, around George Heriot School and into Greyfriars Graveyard.
Well, this is Greyfriars Church grounds, and a very, very, very busy place it is. The Flodden Wall carried on from where we left it in the Vennel, continued on the northern side of George Heriot School to here. We've met back up with it again. While the Telfer Wall carried on into Lauriston Place and then turned into Bistro Place. And the two walls met up again in Bistro Port. And then the Flodden Wall carried on from Bistro Port along what today is a very short street that is aptly called Bistro Port.
Some of these ports, or gateways, changed name over the centuries. Bristol Port, for example, has also been known as Greyfriars Port and Society Port. We can see a short section of the wall at this location in a photo dating to 1920. The wall has been incorporated into some buildings, but it's clearly visible. Today, the buildings and that section of wall have gone and been replaced by the Museum of Scotland, and in fact there remains a short bit of the Flodden Wall in situ in the basement of the Museum of Scotland. The buildings on the right, along with that lovely little window that sticks out, can still be seen. This area was once known as Society, hence the name Society Port, after the Fellowship and Society of Ale and Beer Brewers of the Borough of Edinburgh, who were granted the land in the 16th century. This coloured sketch dating to 1827 shows the town wall at Bristol Port and demonstrates pretty clearly just how formidable these walls were centuries after their construction.
There is, of course, because of William Lawrence, right? Yeah, quite controversial figure every year. Yeah. I think that's I maybe stayed a little bit longer than we typically would for. Now, admittedly, guys, this location has led to a massive amount of confusion.
Well, I think I'm being followed by a tour group. They were in the Greyfriars Cemetery and all of a sudden they appeared behind me. Anyway, from Bistro Port, the Flodden Wall continued a short distance to Potter Row Port, which is essentially just a little way down the street there. I didn't want to film there because the place is awash with students. If it's not tour groups, it's students. It'll be old folks next. Yeah, and then from Potter Row Port or Gate, it carried on down South College Street and into Drummond Street, turned a corner into the Pleasance, and it's in Drummond Street and the Pleasance that we can see, like the Vennel, some of the best preserved sections of the Flodden Wall, in addition to the remains of a corner bastion or defensive tower.
Last time I had music, I was completely like zoned out for
Well, here in Drummond Street, the wall has been largely cut down and totally erased in places. But here, outside a rather grand building that's now part of the University of Edinburgh, we can still see it, and I'm inside this building's grounds. But I think what's perhaps more interesting about this section of wall is that we can see the walkway that runs inside the wall. I mean, obviously the section of the wall above the walkway has been cut down. You've got a fence there. Originally that would have been battlemented like the section of the Flodden Wall that we saw in the Vennel. But the walkway is just a really good feature. It's nice to see that it's still there. In the old days, when the wall was used for defensive purposes, men would have walked backwards and forwards on that wall, keeping a lookout. And in the event of trouble, they would have fired arrows and musket balls while standing on that wall. It's just a really nice feature. But I think probably down around the corner into Pleasance, and we can see, I think, maybe like the Vennel, we can see the Flodden Wall at its full height.
Where the Pleasance meets St Mary's Street and the Cowgate was another major gateway or port in and out of Edinburgh, the Cowgate Port. Old paintings and photographs reveal how fetchingly jumbly the whole area looked long ago. At the top of St Mary's Street, on the Royal Mile, was the site of the Nethergate Port, and in a map dating to 1647, we can see just how overcrowded the city was within the city walls compared to outside this gate, a sign of the safety and security the wall provided for the local inhabitants. While long gone, we can still see a small decorative fragment of the port on the side of the Scottish Storytelling Centre. The Flodden Wall continued round and beyond Jeffrey Street to Newport, which was under where North Bridge is today, and where the waters of the Nor Loch ended, the loch itself offering natural defence to the town on that side. In a close just off the High Street, we can find another bit of what is probably the earlier King's Wall.
This is Tweedale Court, just off the High Street. It's always difficult to be certain, but I suspect, like the wall that we saw at the very beginning of the video, this could and may well be a part of the King's Wall. You don't build a wall that high just to protect your flower beds. Always nice to end with a pint. I'm in the Waverley Bar, which is beside the World's End Bar, just more or less at the site of the Nethergate Port. And it was once right beside and within the city walls, the Flodden Wall. I was going to end in the World's End, but it's absolutely chock-a-block with people. And it's nice and quiet in here in a pub I've never been in before, the Waverley. It's beautiful. And I couldn't resist ending beside this stairway with some nice carved bits of wood, you know. It's beautiful. I think when the wall still stood and did its job from a defensive point of view, I think a lot of people would never have ventured further than the Nethergate Port. They would never have ventured outside the wall. Potentially a dangerous place out there. I mean, there would have been some people who would have kind of explored further and maybe headed for the Arthur Seat and Salisbury Crags for a wee adventure, but I do think that for a lot of people, the city of Edinburgh within the Flodden Wall would have been their whole world. And by the wall was in effect the end of the world, at the very edge. Hence the name of the pub, the World's End. But if, like me, you find the World's End absolutely mobbed, then just pop next door to the Waverley. Highly recommended. I'm Eddie Burns. Take care.